Vraja Jana Ranjana.
Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajikacharya Astatara Sata Sri Śrimad. His Divine Grace, the Bhāgavatam, the Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki. Jai Nitya Pravishta Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajikacharya Astatara Sata Sri Śrimad. His Divine Grace, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Prabhupada Ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki. Namacharya Haridas Thakur Ki. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasudeva Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Grantaraj Śrimad Bhāgavatam Ki Nitai Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru, Sri Gauranga and Srila Prabhupada. And reading from Srila Prabhupada Leelamrita, Volume 6, chapter titled, I Have Done My Part. Thanks to Satsarup Goswami, for whom we offer our humble prayers for his speedy recovery. In early July, some of the devotees in Vrindavan were working on sketches of the universe according to the Śrimad Bhāgavatam. They were puzzled, however, about how to account for satellite photos of the Earth, which seemed to contradict the Śrimad Bhāgavatam's description. Srila Prabhupada's reply was that the scientists were bound up by their own conditioning and could not go beyond a certain point. When Tamal Krishna reiterated that Śrimad Bhāgavatam's explanation still didn't agree with modern travel around the Earth, Prabhupada insisted that it did. You are prejudiced, he said. You are conditioned with preconceptions of how everything is. It is just like a bull grinding, going around in a circle. He is tied up and simply going around. So everyone is tied up. They cannot go beyond a point, and they cannot move any way they like, just like the bull. They have cheated about going to the moon. So how can we believe them? They want to explain the whole universe, but how can we believe them? Once someone is shown to be a cheater, he will always cheat. A gentleman will say, I don't know, but they are not gentlemen. They are loafer class. How can we believe them? They said the world was flat. Then Galileo said it was round, and for this he was almost hanged. They didn't know and he didn't know, but our knowledge doesn't change because it is perfect. As soon as there is change, it is not perfect. A few days later, the committee of devotees returned to Prabhupada and said that the question was still unanswered regarding how the Bhagavatam's description of Jambudvip could accommodate the fact of traveling west from Los Angeles and reaching India. In reply, Srila Prabhupada stressed that they not concern themselves with such a minor issue, and he referred to the Pacific Ocean as a drop of water. The descriptions in the Bhagavatam could not be adjusted within the limits of mundane knowledge. Srila Prabhupada said that with experimental logic, one cannot understand the inconceivable. I skipped the part about the camel. We already read that. Everything is inconceivable, he said, and these rascals want to bring it as conceivable. Don't be puffed up by your so-called education. It has no value. One day while Srila Prabhupada was sitting in the garden hearing some news from his secretary, several monkeys appeared on top of the high wall and looked down at the devotees. Srila Prabhupada had often asked the devotees to chase them, and once he had even asked about that a monkey doll be hanged by their neck from a tree to frighten the others, but still the monkeys came. Sometimes the sight of a monkey prompted Srila Prabhupada to remark about Darwin. One time he talked about how Krishna dealt with the monkeys as friends, giving them butter and playing with them in the forest. As he talked, small chipmunks would run along the top of the wall, and occasionally a pair of green parrots would swoop into the yard, chirping loudly and flittering within the branches of a bush, and then flying upwards into the sky above the garden. Suddenly a large peacock alighted nearby and spread its gorgeous purple, blue, and green feathers, as if posing for the pleasure of the devotees. While a brahmachari continued steadily fanning him, Srila Prabhupada sat silently. Tamal Krishna, however, had some business which he thought would not be too demanding for Srila Prabhupada. Sitting at his spiritual master's feet, he broached an important topic. Srila Prabhupada, he began, we are receiving a number of letters now from people who want to get initiated. So up until now, since you were becoming ill, we asked them to wait. Tamal Krishna suggested that since the Guru has to take on the karma of his disciples, and Srila Prabhupada's health is already weak, he should wait before accepting more disciples. Srila Prabhupada said nothing, and the Vrindavan piece was punctuated by the splashing of the fountain. And then he began to speak. He named 3 of his disciples and said, so these 3 can do. Tamal Krishna asked if devotees in America should write directly to these men for initiation. Nearby, said Prabhupada, and he named 3 more disciples, leading devotees in Europe. 5, 6 men may divide, said Prabhupada, whoever is nearest. Tamal Krishna asked whether this would apply to both first and second initiation. Prabhupada said yes. So there is no need for devotees to write to you for first and second initiation, said Tamal Krishna. They can write to the man nearest them, but all these persons are still your disciples. Anybody who would give initiation is doing so on your behalf. Yes, said Prabhupada. Tamal Krishna asked if there was anyone in India that Srila Prabhupada wanted to do this, and Srila Prabhupada added another name. Srila Prabhupada asked to hear the names he had given, and Tamal Krishna recited 7 names. That's all, said Prabhupada. Now you distribute. For the time being, 7 names. Then he added 2 more. So without waiting for me, said Prabhupada, whoever you consider deserves, that will depend on discretion. Srila Prabhupada said nothing else. And after a few minutes, Tamal Krishna asked if Prabhupada would like to hear a kirtan. Srila Prabhupada assented by a slight gesture, and the chanters who had been waiting came to join him. The next morning, Srila Prabhupada added 2 more names, making a total of 11 disciples who would act as Ritvik, or representatives of the Acharya. Srila Prabhupada had not liked the idea of newcomers to ISKCON having to wait unnecessarily long to be initiated. Now initiations could continue regularly at the discretion of his 11 selected men. July 10th, this is 1977. Tamal Krishna received a phone call from Gopal Krishna. The Mayapur temple had been attacked by a gang of 300 dacoits, hoodlums. 5 devotees were wounded and in the hospital. Bhavananda Goswami had fired a shotgun at the attackers, injuring 2. The police, who didn't arrive until 2 hours later after being called, had arrested Bhavananda and put him in jail. Srila Prabhupada became disturbed. If the dacoits attacked and we used our shotgun, he said, what is wrong? Later that day, Prabhupada heard the Hindustan Times version of the attack. According to the news reports, some cows had wandered onto ISKCON property, and the devotees had beaten the cows. This had angered the villagers, who on coming to the temple to complain had been shot at. 2 had been injured. The article named Bhavananda Goswami, and at the end mentioned that the founder of the temple, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, had not been present. Srila Prabhupada heard the article, made a few comments, and went on with his afternoon's writing and translating as usual. But late that afternoon, he called for Tamal Krishna. I am afraid of a big conspiracy, he said. The last line of the article said that the founder Acharya was not present. They were sorry. They would have arrested me and put me in jail. Tamal Krishna scoffed that the news article was one-sided That doesn't sound right, he said, that the devotees beat cows. The devotees don't beat cows. Within a few days, a letter came from Gopal Krishna giving the facts of the Mayapur incident. About 50 Muslim men were stealing crops from the ISKCON land. When Nitai Chand tried to stop them, they attacked him, cutting his head in 3 places. Later, while he was being treated in the temple infirmary, the men came and beat Nitai Chand and stripped one of the ladies naked. Meanwhile, another 250 men attacked, breaking the gates, cutting phone and electric wires, and destroying the water pumps. Wanting to scare the mob, Bhavananda had fired a shot in the air. But when they did not disperse, he fired another shot, injuring 2 men. In the meantime, the attackers had broken both hands of one of the Gurukul teachers and beaten many other devotees. 2 hours later, the police arrived and recommended the devotees go to Krishnanagar police station, 20 miles away, to file a complaint. When the devotees had reached the station, they had been arrested, and the 2 seriously injured devotees were denied medical treatment. Bhavananda Goswami was still in jail. Prabhupada had said it was a plot to drive away the Hare Krishna men. They want that all Bengal be completely godless, he said. When Tamal Krishna suggested that this incident would hurt their village preaching, Prabhupada replied, no, it will be to our favor very soon. I think the central government will take action. This is the same as Kamsa against Krishna. Krishna must win. No one can defeat Krishna. If I had been there, they would have charged that I ordered the shooting and arrested me. Now I am an old man. I cannot take an active stand. So you all must do everything carefully. Prabhupada continued to think and comment on the incident. The Gunda class doesn't like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they said. They say Chaitanya Mahaprabhu made people emasculated. In Orissa, they say that after Maharaj Pratap Paruja met Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he lost his Kshatriya strength. He was a very powerful king, but after he met Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he became effeminate. What is our reply to that? Asked Tamal Krishna. What can you reply? Said Prabhupada. If they conclude something like that, they have no idea of spiritual life. They say this is disruptive. Lord Chaitanya is saying, Nadanam, Najanam. We don't want such things, and they want them. So how can you reply to such people? Everyone wants this, and we say that we don't want it. How can you make a compromise with such people? In your country also, they say, what is wrong with illicit sex? What is wrong with intoxication? They say we are brainwashing, is it not? It is very difficult to push on this movement. Still we are doing. That is Krishna's grace. Seeing that Prabhupada was disturbed, Tamal Krishna suggested, will you try to translate this afternoon, Srila Prabhupada? But Prabhupada continued on the same point. A young, beautiful woman comes in the dead of night to see Haridas Thakur, to offer her body, and he denied. Who will appreciate that? We appreciate, said Tamal Krishna. You appreciate, said Prabhupada, but in the modern world, who will appreciate? Prabhupada continued pointing out the irrevocable split between the devotees and the non-devotees. Their idea is that a young man cannot live without a young woman. And yet Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, oh, you are after young women? That is more dangerous than drinking poison. Srila Prabhupada ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Śrimad Bhāgavatam, 3rd Canto, Chapter 21, Text 1. Nobody puts the place mark back. That's the first purport. Chapter titled Conversation Between Manu and Kardama Muni. Text 1. Viduruvacha Swayambhuvasya Manu Avangsha Paramasamataha Katyatang Bhagavan Yatra Maitunen Aindire Prajaha Viduruvacha Swayambhuva Sichamanur Avangsa Paramasamataha Katyatang Bhagavan Yatra Maitun in Aindire Prajaha Viduruvacha Swayambhuva Sichamanur Vangsa Paramasamataha Katyatam Bhagavan Yatra Maitunen Aindire Prajaha. Please chant. Viduruvacha Svayambhuva Sichamano Vangsa Paramasamataha Katyatam Bhagavan Yatra Maitunen Aindire Prajaha Viduruvacha Svayambhuva Sichamano Vangsa Paramasamataha Katyatam Bhagavan Yatra Maitunen Aindire Prajaha Viduruvacha Svayambhuva Sichamano Vangsa Paramasamataha Katyatam Bhagavan Yatra Maitunen Aindire Prajaha. Ladies. Viduruvacha Svayambhuva Sichamano Vangsa Paramasamataha Katyatam Bhagavan Yatra Maitunen Aindire Prajaha Viduruvacha Svayambhuva Sichamano Vangsa Paramasamataha Katyatam Bhagavan Yatra Maitunen Aindire Prajaha. Vidura Uvacha. Vidura said, Swayambhuvasya, of Swayambhuva, Cha, and Mano, of Manu, Vangsa, the dynasty, Parama, most, Samata, esteemed, Katyatam, kindly describe, Bhagavan, O worshipful sage, Yatra, in which, Maitunena, through sexual intercourse, Edire, multiplied, Prajaha, the progeny. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Vidura said, the line of Swayambhuva Manu was most esteemed. O worshipful sage, I beg you, give me an account of this race, whose progeny multiplied through sexual intercourse. Please repeat. Vidura said, the line of Swayambhuva Manu was most esteemed. O worshipful sage, I beg you, give me an account of this race, whose progeny multiplied through sexual intercourse. Purport. Regulated sex life to generate good population is worth accepting. Actually, Vidura was not interested in hearing the history of persons who merely engage in sex life, but he was interested in the progeny of Swayambhuva Manu, because in that dynasty, good devotee kings appeared who protected their subjects very carefully with spiritual knowledge. By hearing the history of their activities, therefore, one becomes more enlightened. An important word used in this connection is parama samataha, which indicates that the progeny created by Swayambhuva Manu and his sons was approved of by great authorities. In other words, sex life for creating exemplary population is acceptable to all sages and authorities of Vedic scriptures. Om Jnana Tamrandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langtaite Gurum Yat Kipata Mam Vande Shri Gurum Dinataranam. There's an interesting parallel in this regard, that we see that in the course of populating the universe, there's an obvious necessity, which is completely authorized. And we see that this has parallels in many philosophies with regards to populating the universe. You know, in the history of Christianity, they have Adam and Eve. And obviously, God is Atmaram Swarat. He's completely independent. So he could have just populated the entire universe independently. He already endowed Lord Brahma, the creator, to create the Manus. He could have just skipped the whole step and populated everything. But there's a necessity to have some, how can you say, example of how civilization should be constructed in such a way that everything is going on as we are familiar with it. We have no experience of this spontaneous generation. They have some. There's the scientists have accepted that there are certain living entities who appear to come from gases or some other circumstances. And it appears that they're created from nothing. And of course, they extrapolate this to, give some false theory about the way the universe was created by some big bang or some, what do they say, this primordial soup. It even sounds ridiculous when you say it, primordial soup. Who cut up the vegetables? Where did the elements come from? But they have no real. So they grasp at these things, and then, when they have some example of, and of course, early scientists had their intellectual capacity in certain circumstances was completely dulled by their bad habits. Who are these scientists who are creating these false theories? They're contaminated by so much conditioning, it's difficult to describe what they were doing, how they were living, what they were eating. But yet, those theories ruled the world for hundreds of years. But no one would question, what's the point? No one really cared to the extent to challenge them. But as people gain some so-called advancement in scientific knowledge or theory, hypothesis, experimentation, conclusion, by some small endeavor, they try to extrapolate and say if this is equal to this, then X must equal this, that if these living entities can be, and of course, they're never able to really justify. Darwin's missing link was never found. still to this day, yet the bogus theory is still prevalent. People still talk about the so-called theory of evolution, but it has no basis in fact, in reality. But for want of accepting that the documentation of the Vedas, because specifically, Prabhupada alluded to the fact that Darwin's theory was, Darwin was what Prabhupada, how he would address him as a Britisher. And so the Britishers wanted to minimize the importance of the Vedas, which obviously were in great esteem in India. And in order to break the connection with the ancient traditions, they wanted to miseducate an entire population on this false theory of evolution. So there is always something nefarious about these so-called scientists and their theories. Even today, so-called scientists propagating so many misconceptions on the innocent people at large, giving them some, how can you say, always trying to say that by chemical manipulation, we will increase the lifespan, we will eradicate disease, we will make you something other than what you are now, a better so-called human being. But what can be better than what God has given? And why are they even attempting to try to manipulate persons at that level? So this is actually demoniac. All such experiments. And they do it under the guise of spiritual balance. No, we want to eradicate disease. We'll just manipulate your DNA with a little bit just to try to, make you something. But make you something what? They have no idea, because they're not God. There used to be that old commercial when we were kids about that, what was it? It was a butter substitute. And the purport of the commercial was, don't mess with Mother Nature. Or you can't fool Mother Nature. That was the purport. You can't fool Mother Nature. They had Mother Nature appeared in some fantasized personality, and they had, I think, butter and margarine. And then they were having Mother Nature test to see if she could tell the difference. And in the commercial, she couldn't, this actress couldn't tell the difference. And so then Mother Nature became very angry that you're trying to fool Mother Nature. So this is essentially what the scientists are trying to do. They have no idea, but yet they're willing to pretend that due to their self-appointed authority that they have the wherewithal to play with people's DNA. So this is demonic. That means you're saying you're as good as God or better than God. God didn't make you properly. He left you susceptible to so many diseases, many of which did not exist hundreds of years ago. But due to, the so-called advancement of civilization, where people are eating things which they should not eat, and so many other things. Therefore, as we progress, when we see in the Bhāgavatam where it says, Manda Samanda Matayo, Manda Bhagya Upajutya, that people are becoming short-lived. How are they becoming short-lived? Because they're not getting the benefits that the planet has to offer in the form of pure water, pure foodstuffs, the abundancy of what God has given. It's all being denied. It's all being, run through the factories and everything else. So this is And of course, this reminds me that our God Brother Dayananda will be coming on the 28th of this month, and he'll be presenting something which he's very familiar with, very scholarly, very erudite and articulate. And everyone should try to come for the Bhāgavatam class for the residents and in the Lotus Room in the evening to hear about the environmental concerns. These are not some superficial environmental concerns. Yes, there's obviously threats to so many aspects of our environment. But these things go deeper because everything begins with us, from our minds and how we view the world, and therefore how we interact. So, and that's also the same. And to go to the Prabhupada's Leelamrita, where we see that Manu is given permission, not just given permission, but encouraged to increase the population. This seems a little contradictory. In one sense, we're being told that, sex life should be, controlled. But at the same time, but Prabhupada also reiterates that, and it's described here clearly, that good progeny, not unwanted progeny, not Varna Shankara, the good progeny is encouraged. And especially if the parents are there, if the society is structured properly, if the sages are properly honored and respected, and the education is how it should be, then there's no problem. The problem becomes when there's a breakdown in society, that we have Varna Shankara, that nobody's being properly educated, not the parents, not the offspring, and therefore you have people who are they have no idea what to do, and therefore so much mischief and nonsense is going on. And people say, oh, it's okay. It's all an expansion of meat eating, intoxication, illicit sex, and gambling. That therefore all these problems exist. And so Prabhupada, in his attempt to try to stave off this rapid decline in the world at large, he also encouraged that his disciples take up this position of initiating. So just like Manu in this regard, so Prabhupada tried to pick as best as he could at that time, in order to continue on. And if someone is doing this service with a genuine desire to please the spiritual master and the Guru Varga, the Parampara, then that is a service, just like Manu had his service. But obviously it's a difficult service. And one has to be very careful. There's Nadanam Najanam. It says, not many followers. Very clear. So therefore their increase is justified. In Vedic society, sannyasi is considered to be the spiritual master of the entire Vedic Varnashram, Daiva Varnashram system. And they can give initiation. There's no restrictions. But in Nectar of Instruction, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu personally said it shouldn't. That has to be careful. If one is qualified, then he can make disciples. All over the world, it says. At the same time, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, not too many. So there's some caution. And we see that Tamal Krishna Maharaj voiced that said, or at least Harisari paraphrased that too many disciples, spiritual master, his health is reflected in whether or not the disciples are behaving properly. And we've said it before in the class that when Prabhupada was asked, why does the spiritual master get sick? He said, because the disciples are not following properly. They're not chanting their Gayatri, they're not chanting their rounds. But at the same time, people, well, not people, these are devotees. They have to see the example of the spiritual masters taking on this burden reflected in his poor health and use it in order to become more determined to be strict in their execution of their duties. It cannot go on. One devotee I know, when he heard that, Prabhupada said that spiritual master becomes ill because his disciples are not chanting their Gayatri mantra. This devotee was a very sweet devotee. But at some point, before Prabhupada left, he left the movement. The term Brahmananda coined was blooped. He blooped. And I used to wonder because we were close friends. But you never, and even, this is why it's necessary for devotees to forge relationships with each other to the extent that they're able to reveal their minds to each other. But a lot of devotees keep a little bit separate for whatever reason. But typically, maybe they feel vulnerable. Maybe they don't want to relate certain sensitive issues. But without such confidence, without having that ability to discuss topics that may result in someone's leaving, then you can see the result of not having these relationships. So anyway, this devotee left, and for many years we didn't see. Many years, 10, 15 years, whatever. And one day, he just came to the temple, and we were just thinking. Of course, when a devotee comes back, it's just like he never left, technically speaking. We see that. Nehabi Kamanasas Diya Praktibhaya Navijate Swapamapa Shidhamasha Jayate Mahatobhya. That there's no loss or diminution. So you don't lose anything. You start up from exactly where you left. So, and then, we were friendly before. We discussed a few things, and then he was a little more open. He said, yes, Prabhu, I left. And this is very qualified. Before he joined, he was qualified. He was already a graduate or postgraduate. And he entered into the business world, became very successful. Everyone wants to get a nice place in New York City when you can get a certain neighborhood and your co-op or whatever, and a beautiful wife, which he said, but then one day it just, he said, what am I doing? Because, I'm not getting younger, my life is passing, and I've basically wasted. So I asked him, I said, so what? Because usually when a devotee leaves, they try to forget everything. They stop chanting their round, they stop doing everything. They don't want to even hear about Krishna. It's because it's a little painful in one sense to try to, because you realize that I'm in Maya. Whatever you learned, it's still there. It hasn't disappeared. And you have to consciously set aside those thoughts that, oh, that's, and what do you say? You can't. This knowledge is so powerful that it's embedded. And you have to struggle, in one sense, to ignore it. Just like pretending not to be able to see impending disaster. There's a train coming at you. And you say, no, it's not going to hit me, or whatever. I mean, how? But obviously, unless you step off the tracks, it's definitely going to hit you. So this devotee so I asked him, I said, so how were you able to maintain over the course of these years and finally come back? And he said, I never stopped chanting my Gayatri mantra. I said, interesting. He didn't chant his rounds. He had, he was an executive. in a very high position. Then he walked away from me. He said, "But somehow or other, I never stopped chanting my Gayatri Mantra." Because he remembered that the spiritual master gets sick. Okay, but during the time after he left, Prabhupada left the planet. But somehow or other, that stuck with him. And so he never stopped chanting his Gayatri. So there are certain practices that one must totally connect with. Chanting your rounds. If you're second initiated, chanting your Gayatri Mantra. Obviously following the 4 regulative principles. Without these, then you're not protected in any way, shape, or form. If you're trying to do anything spiritual, you're trying to go into battle against the forces of evil, against Maya, and you're going out there without your armor, without your Nrsinga Kabacha, without your Narayan Kabacha, even Mother Yashoda, she was chanting these names using the tail of a calf and the dust of Braj to bless baby Krishna that he not be harmed by the demons. So these little things, putting on tilak every day, it seems insignificant. But to adhere to these principles is to every day protect yourself. And Prabhupada said, yes, and many times he would always reiterate, follow the rules, follow the little rules and regulations. Because these things are this is what builds reinforces your spiritual identity and minimizes your material identity. What's the first thing a devotee, when they leave a temple, what do? Shave off their sika. Boom. Cut it off. Because everybody can identify you. You're Hare Krishna. Doesn't matter where you are. In the most remote areas, people recognize this flag. So you have to always be conscious of these little things and maintain them in order to preserve your spiritual identity. I am a disciple of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. That's who I am. I remember one time when I went to get my license in India. And getting your license in India back in the day was not like you go to take a road test or anything. You go to the civil lines or wherever the police, they have. And there's just a bunch of people in a line. And everybody sits down, pay your 15 rupees. At that time, 15 rupees. That's this little red book with a bunch of pages that fold out like this, like an accordion. You have to bring a picture. You always have to bring a picture. We used to carry a stack of little photographs with us, because everywhere you go, you have to get this little picture on something. If you go to the foreign registration office, if you go here. So I didn't really know what to expect. I'm filling out all the information, and you could put anything. They were asking you, what's your name? You tell them a name. You could have said Genghis Khan, and they would have wrote it down. They don't care. I said Hansarupa Das. They didn't ask me for my passport or proof of identity. I said Hansarupa Das. And you fill out, and I had D.O. Now in India, D.O. means daughter of. When I put D.O., A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, he said D.O. I said disciple of. Disciple of A.C. Bhaktivedanta. So this is our identity, disciple of. He's our Father. It's not that, we don't put our... But it was interesting. And the whole exercise took a little time and 15 rupees. I had my Indian license, good for all over UP, Uttar Pradesh, and anywhere else. And I drove in India for years. I was never asked. I just threw it in the glove compartment. I was never asked. Nobody ever asked to see that license. What to speak of, in any case. Of course, there's no rules and regulations for traffic in any case, but that's besides the point. But the point is to establish oneself firmly in this identity and to minimize any other remnants. That's why the spiritual master gives us a name. There's a cut. We don't refer to ourselves by our former name. And ultimately it's sannyas, that whole identity. In India, when you take sannyas, you're declared civilly dead. Civilly dead. You no longer exist legally. So we don't go that far, but to the extent that we are, so therefore, because otherwise the tendency would be to revert, and sometimes thinking in this way and sometimes thinking that way. And you cannot maintain. You have to be on one platform or the other. Just like there was that nice Prabhupada memory in the calendar date for the February 12th today, that famous excerpt where Prabhupada talks about the parallel tracks, Krishna and the spiritual master. And the train is running on these two tracks. Right? And we're being pulled along by this train. And in order to be connected in this way, we have to be following, not partially, because to the extent that you're following, you maintain that connection. Otherwise, we've seen situations. You watch the movies when, the special agent, James Bond, whoever, he goes down and he gets down to the left. This has to be an older train, of course. He gets off the top of the car. He's being chased by the bad guys. He goes down and he uncouples the car, and the engine and the coal carrier keep going, and the train now is disconnected. So this is our situation. If we pull that pin, pulling that pin means what? Breaking the four-legged principles, disobeying the order of the spiritual master, committing offenses to the devotees, to the holy name. That pin is going further and further out, and at a certain point, it's fully out, and then you're separate. And there's Krishna, the spiritual master, going down the track without you. So these are all practical considerations. This is not Manu. If we go back to that, we see that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, following the example of his father, that he was a sannyasi, Naishik brahmachari. He never took up family household life. But he said if one can have hundreds of children, then he should do so. But if they can be Krishna conscious. This is how a sannyasi can say that. Because he understood from his father's example what it means. Pure devotee does not mean that you're simply sitting in a cave in the Himalayas, meditating, self-satisfied, with breaking off all worldly contact. No, giving an example. Achar and prachar. Giving example. The acharya is called acharya. Why? Because one who teaches by example. When Prabhupada also was in household life for some time. And as we're reading now in Vrindavan Bhajan, we see his struggle, his example, because we understand that Prabhupada's struggle was merely to continue this Krishna's work. In the same way that, Lord Brahma is giving Manu direction, and so the spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, implanted in Srila Prabhupada at their first meeting what he should do. But because he was a young householder, already engaged, fulfilling so many obligations, so he was compelled to continue on that path for some time. But then Krishna removed all obstacles, all impediments in his path. And that we circulated, see on Dundabat yesterday, what I think was also, yesterday or the day before, was the anniversary of the first edition of Back to Godhead's publication, 1944. And so in Dundabats, they carried that first page, the imprint, and then the print is very difficult to see, so it was transcribed. Everyone should read that. It has as much relation to today's political situation as it did in 1944. So I would encourage everyone to read it. And Prabhupada is describing back what nescience means, what back to Godhead means, and how the whole world can be saved by this return. Prabhupada, and the term he used, which was a term that was current at the time, was called moral rearmament. That everything is due to this weakness in morality and the attempts to try to minimize God. And it is so nice. It's long. I can't read it here. But I'll send, if you look for the link yourself, just open up Dandavats and scroll down to that Back to God. It's very important to read. See how astute Srila Prabhupada was in distilling the essence of the situation. And not just commenting on it, but giving a solution. Tying all the different ideas together from all the various faiths. It was almost like an interfaith article, you could say. But much more advanced than what our feeble attempts. But so poignant that you have to marvel at Srila Prabhupada's, grasp, of everything, and his ability to just relate it to the Vedic conclusion, Bhakti Vedanta. Coming from Bhakti Siddhanta. So we're in a very illustrious lineage. And in order to maintain it, there's a significant responsibility. And Kali Yuga, as it progresses, it becomes harder and harder to stick to the path. The razor's edge. There's actually an old movie made, I think, in the 40s, so about the time that, it might have been in the 30s. Might have been the 30s. Anyway, it's called The Razor's Edge. So obviously there's some cross-referencing here. Prabhupada using the fact that this movie was called The Razor's Edge. And it's a good movie. Devotees used to use it in their preaching. If anyone gets a chance, I don't know where it is. I haven't seen it in 40 years, but it's there someplace. We watched it as an exercise when we were making some presentation. A black and white movie about a person who comes back from the war, World War I. And he's totally, disillusioned. He was at that time after World War I, there was a huge, what do they call it, the Roaring Twenties. There was a flip onto this hedonistic pursuit of pleasure after suffering so much under the pressure of war for so many years and so many millions of people affected by it. So they had this so-called Roaring Twenties. But he was I guess he was in that a socialite circle. And so when he gravitated back into it, he saw that it was meaningless compared to the war, the suffering. And he sought, and everybody was thinking, what's wrong with you? You were such a happy guy before, and now you're just like this sullen. But he had made up his mind to go to India to seek a guru. This is the really poignant thing where he literally goes into the Himalayas, and this is where they get that cliche about climbing the mountain to see the guru sitting at the top and asking him, what is the meaning of life? So like I said, if you get a chance, it's a kind of an interesting movie to watch, The Razor's Edge. Anyway, but that's the point is that it becomes more difficult in Kali Yuga. But we're blessed by the fact, devotees who are a little sensitive to the issue are blessed by the fact that they're able to see all this degradation and recognize the need and go on executing the orders of the spiritual master and the parampara to bring this knowledge for the welfare of all, to distinguish reality from illusion for the welfare of all. So this is our mission, nothing more, nothing less. You know, we have somehow or other, Krishna has given us immense facility, and it is up to us to utilize it properly. Because the common saying, everyone knows, use it or lose it. And that's what was about to happen to this beautiful situation. You know, there was people thinking, let's go to a different place, it'll be better there. You know, this is that bird in the hand is worth two in the bush philosophy. And because, you know, when you have something so, with so much potential, and to give it up for something unknown is the epitome of foolishness. The epitome of foolishness. But yet, there's that tendency is there. Prabhupada uses that example of the dog and his reflection. The dog had somehow or other secured a bone from some dead animal, and he's carrying it around, and he goes to, I can't remember if it was a well or whatever, it must have been something deep. And he looks and he sees in the reflection his own, and he doesn't recognize that this is his reflection, and he sees the dog holding this bone, and he thinks, oh, let me get that bone. It looks more delicious, bigger, even though he's got this bone in his mouth. So, of course, he opens his mouth to get the bone, which is just a reflection of the one that's in his mouth, and of course the bone drops into this deep well, and it's gone. Now he has nothing. So we should not be like this foolish dog, simply looking around and seeing this reflection of enjoyment and thinking, I can get this enjoyment. I just have to release myself from these restrictions. There's no meat eating, no intoxication, no illicit sex, and no gambling. You know? But of course, doing that again results in punak punasta charvata charvanana. Matirna Krishna paratak svatova mitobi padyeti grahavatanam adanta gobir vishatam tamisham punak punas charvata charvananam. Even though there's so much information, you know, and everyone is trying to achieve the same thing, most of it is simply a hard struggle for existence. There's a few. They even have a term for it, called the elite. The elite. And 1% of the population, maybe less than 1%. You know, and they're enjoying like anything. And those who have nothing are thinking, yes, I can attain to that. This is the... And if you tell them, you know, there's many things to consider. Yes, you can attempt to achieve this goal. But even if you achieve this goal, what is the profit? Can you buy happiness? We see that people who are so rich, they're not free from divorce, they're not free from birth, death, old age, and disease. So what have they accomplished? What do they say? What's the common saying? That the symptom of advancement, I forget exactly how it goes, is that he who dies with the most toys, that's considered to be advancement. Huh? He who dies with the most toys wins the game. You know, the so-called game of life. Right? But it's no good to you, and your rascal spoiled children squander it. And what was the purpose of your life? Now you take, and Prabhupada gives the example of the rich landowner. He dies and he takes birth as a cobbler, and he's beaten with shoes by his own children. You know, there's so many instances of this, you know, because you're so attached to your whatever, name and fame, profit, distinction. But everything is lost at the time of death. But if you do something good, of course, this is frowned upon in the material world. They say you will never be remembered for anything that you did that was good. You will only be remembered for the one mistake or the bad things you did. Which, you know, that's practical. We see that happen all the time. You could do so many good things, but if you make one mistake, boom, finished. That's what you'll be remembered for. So people think, why should I even try? So much peer pressure for people to do things, and nobody realizes how volatile the situation is. Life is so fragile. One 14-year-old girl, she killed herself because she was bullied. You know, it's something, what do they say? It's gone viral. That in this situation, you know, because her beating was filmed on social media by the people who did it. And she was so distraught. Imagine 14 years old, you know, what you have whole life in front of you. She went and she killed herself. So peer pressure is like that. Peer pressure is everywhere. Peer pressure to do things which you would not ordinarily do given the opportunity to consider everything together. You know, that's why in a hustle or in a scam, they always tell you to be careful of people who are telling you to do something urgently. That's one of the red flags. When, you know, as someone who had to investigate such situations, we would come often and they'll say, no, you have to do it right now. Otherwise, they're going to issue a warrant for you, and they're going to come to your house, they're going to seize all your assets. This is the current scam that's going around at tax time. People target the elderly on the phone, and they say that this is the IRS, and, you know, we see that you have a huge penalty looming, and people are completely, you know, they say, what are you talking about? But they're able to spoof. When you get caller ID, this is a problem, of course. In the old days, there's no caller ID. But you can spoof caller ID so it says IRS on it. It's a very simple thing to do. And so people are thinking that the IRS is calling me. Why is the IRS calling me? And then, of course, the red flag is that you have to go to and you have to buy, you know, $10,000 worth of Apple Pay cards or Apple gift cards or whatever it is. I can't remember. The old scheme was a little different. The old scheme was go to Western Union. Now it's gift cards because they're untraceable. And they put them in a FedEx envelope and they send them to this anonymous address. And yet old people, they're so gullible, they'll do it. You know? And unfortunately, most of these call centers are where? India. It's a huge racket. Millions upon millions of dollars. Millions upon millions of dollars. This is called, what is that? Sukriti, duskriti. Good intelligence and negative intelligence. So anyway, we've heard from Srila Prabhupada, the founder Acharya, that this process of initiation should continue, and that it's elaborated further, different areas, how it should continue, what are the details. But we understand that this mission is so important, just like Manu's executing the order of his spiritual master, his father. And what was the result? We see that all the demigods, all the previously created denizens before the Manus, they were satisfied. They said, yes, Bravo, you've done a good job, Brahma. You did a good job. Now you've created the process by which the population, the universe will be populated. So everyone thought it was good. So we also think it's good. That this movement should continue. This is a very important thing. It should not be limited. It should be unlimited. But it should be done cautiously. There's many things to take into consideration. And it will continue. It will continue after the first generation of disciples leaves. Already there's, it's diminishing daily, the number of Prabhupada's disciples. So, yeah. But this movement will not finish and will continue for 10,000 years. And that's the verdict of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So, everyone has so much to look forward to. There's nothing negative about the situation that we see from our perspective. The little things that are disturbances, they're disturbances to us. They're not disturbances to the train. When the train is moving, the spiritual master and Krishna down those tracks, nothing, very rarely, the only thing that people try to derail it, but for the most part, they even have this thing on the front of the train. It's called a cow catcher. Because animals generally wander onto the tracks, but this cow catcher is constructed in such a way that it deflects them off to the side. So in this way, the movement is moving on. And as we saw from the Lilamrita also, there is attempts to sabotage the movement, one method or another, by bad publicity, this and that. But it goes on. So that happened 50 years ago. And it was resolved. Everyone saw through it. They recognized the situation. Whatever it was, yes. There can be mistakes on both sides, but still, everything is arranged by Krishna himself. And nothing can really stop it. But we should remember that the reputation of our spiritual master should be in the forefront of our mind. And never do anything that can bring dishonor to the movement, the mission, or the teacher, Srila Prabhupada. Any questions or comments? Shall I read the shloka again? Vidura said, the line of Swayambhuva Manu was most esteemed. O worshipful sage, I beg you, give me an account of this race whose progeny multiplied through sexual intercourse. And this lineage, this dynasty is not going on by sexual intercourse. But nevertheless, it's going on. Continues. So, any questions, comments, corrections? You can speak loud. I can hear you. Oh, but the mic so that the people in the audience can hear. Yeah, that's why. They can't really hear that so much.
Just a couple of additions.
Comments. These are comments.
Comments or contribution. There was a nice photograph of all the devotees, like there were many, like 50 or 60 of Krishna House, Gainesville. And Korma Prabhu, Prabhupada's dear disciple from Australia, he put a comment that, wow, if we have to come back again, or we come back to serve the mission, they'll be our mommies and daddies.
Or what?
They'll be our mommies and daddies.
Yes.
And I forget the situation, but Prabhupada was asked for some legal paper to, what is his father's name? And he signed in his own writing, Sri Śrimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada is my father.
Yes, that's how we have to. This is our essential relationship, spiritual father, and not just in this life. And many devotees have expressed that, I don't know Krishna, but I know Prabhupada. So if there's Janme, Prabhu say. So birth after birth, there's no, I would be completely satisfied to assist Prabhupada wherever he is, whatever he's doing, in any circumstance. Because we understand that he's directly Krishna's representative. And can you imagine, I mean, just for a second, if you have that and you were actually there at that point, wherever, wouldn't anyone want to be with their spiritual master at this point? This is something that, for a sincere disciple, he's not thinking of anything else, really. He's not thinking of his own pleasure, his own, that, I only want to go into Radha Krishna's pastimes. I only want to go into Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes. No, it's not unheard of. I mean, if Prabhupada's a cowherd boy someplace, yeah, I'll take that. This is very special.
I just heard on a Prabhupada memory, one devotee, in a question and answer, one lady asked Prabhupada, you've taught that by thinking of Krishna at the time of death, you will go back home, back to Godhead. So what will be the result if I think of you at the time of death? And Prabhupada just closed his eyes for like a moment, then opened his eyes and said, the result will be the same.
Yeah, so we can understand. He told one devotee one time, who was concerned about his, he wasn't such a strict devotee, and that he had a habit of, his weaknesses of heart. And Prabhupada said, just hold on to my dhoti. He didn't say hold on to Krishna's dhoti or remember this, the lotus face of Śrimad Radharani. He said, just hold on to my dhoti. I know a shortcut. That's just saying. So yes, if we hold on to the spiritual master firmly, he knows a shortcut. You're going to go back to Godhead. You're going to go wherever the spiritual master is. Where do we think the spiritual master goes? He may again be sent out as a special emissary. And if we're fortunate, we'll get to accompany him again. He often said that you all came by the grace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to assist me in this movement. By the grace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, by the grace of my spiritual master. It's difficult to conceive of. We all think of ourselves in a relative way that, these were just hippies on the Lower East Side or whatever. They're just, what were they? They were engaged in some. But we have no complete understanding. We only have a relative understanding of the situation. Whatever they were. But somehow or other, they were there to assist the pure devotee. And so, that has to be taken into consideration with any other consideration that one might have about that situation or those personalities. Any other questions? Radha Govinda Dev ki, Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki. I thought Samaksh was going to make a last-minute question. Take it.